Good evening, or as our friend Prudentialist often says, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on wherever you are or whenever you are, because of course you may be listening to this live, and you may be listening to it uh, via Memorex, which is something no younger person will even know what I'm talking about. Welcome to our second stream, which is a thorough dissection and explication of David Lynch's final work of cinema, which is called Twin Peaks: The Return. And I am very fortunate and proud to be joined today by my friends, the Prudentialist. Hello, Prude.
Hello, Mr. Dee.
And Christopher Sandbatch. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. So very good that you gentlemen could come back so soon. We did our first stream last week, and I thought it went well. And so here we are. Here we are yet again, diving into the strange world of Twin Peaks: The Return. And we basically, on the last stream, we got through sort of introduction and preliminary talk and the first episode. So we're gonna shoot for episode 2, maybe 2 and 3. We will be here until 8 p.m. I've got a hard cutoff point then. So yeah. So if people recall, episode 1 ended with the arrest of William Hastings, who is a character who was arrested on suspicion of murdering a woman called Ruth Davenport, who was a librarian at, I believe, the local school, or perhaps at the local library, I can't remember. And taken into custody by the police. They found a piece of flesh in the boot of his automobile, and we were left. Actually, the final image was of a gramophone, which we saw early in episode 1 with the introduction of the fireman, or the giant. And so episode 2 opens with quite an astounding image, which is, of course, also a figure that will appear and become very important in subsequent episodes of Twin Peaks: The Return, and that is a woodsman. And actually, this opening scene is of William Hastings sitting in his jail cell, and the camera pans over, and we see our woodsman. So, do we have any thoughts about the woodsman in general?
The thing that I wanted to point out again about this opening is to look not necessarily so much a thought about the woodsman, but again, just because I have to reintroduce my own themes over and over again, because I do have a point here. I remember a while ago there was some Curtis Yarvin essay or something, and his wife made him stop. And I do have a point here. But whenever I say last week, I spent a lot of time talking about that one question is, okay, if you knew you had freedom, what would you do with it? But then also I pointed at sort of the whole point of coming back to, the Twin Peaks universe is you have another story to tell. It's interesting. Again, we have two episodes in, and this time we're not starting in Twin Peaks. We're nowhere near. He does this. Lynch also does this in Fire Walk with Me. It opens nowhere near where you expect this setting to. This the name of it's Twin Peaks. So we're starting somewhere else again. So there's a different story at the forefront.
Indeed, and of course, Fire Walk with Me also opens with, something we talked about, and certainly that I will probably end up mentioning many times, is Lynch's obsessive use of doubling, or split characters. So that often, and of course, literally, there's the little man from another place, as he was called in the original series, appears. He calls him. Well, he says doppelganger, and of course, you get the reference to the doppelganger with Dale Cooper. But also, as I said, as Christopher notes, Fire Walk with Me opens before anything to do with Laura Palmer actually takes place, and it opens with two characters, two FBI agents, who are kind of just like, but not quite like Dale Cooper, who are investigating a murder of a young woman whose name is Teresa Banks. And so again, it's a sort of shadow or sort of reverse echo of what we have come to know about Twin Peaks. And of course, I think one of the things that sort of bothered people when Fire Walk with Me came out is that a lot of the film, I mean, a good 20 minutes, perhaps, maybe even a half hour of the film has nothing to do with Twin Peaks. You know, you don't actually get there, and you don't hear the theme. The familiar theme, of course, is not the theme of the film. The first image, of course, in Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me, I wanted to mention it last week, is of course, it starts out with just this sort of bluish white sort of haze, which then, as the title sequence goes on, starts to kind of come into focus, and the camera pans out, and you realize, of course, is that you've been looking at television static, and that's the sort of color, and the camera slowly pans out, and you realize, you know, you see a small old-fashioned CRT black and white television tuned to static, and then when the title sequence ends, you hear a woman scream, and a hammer, a sledgehammer, smashes the television. So I think, apropos of my sort of theory that part of the lingering sort of idea that hangs above all of the enterprise of Twin Peaks is a commentary on television and a commentary on media.
Wait, back to the Woodsman here real quick. This is one of these, and this is the reason I didn't just jump on this immediately is because this is one of the symbols, one of the entities that recurs a lot, and I don't really know what to do with him. I mean, we find out eventually that he's, like, you know, associated with this sort of Judy concept or Judy character, but I don't know what the directionality of these like Woodsman characters are. Like, if you understand, because there are more of these apparition-like things that come, but they, you know, even when we do find out where they come from, it's not really clear if they have any positionality or if they're an artifact. But, you know, like beginning, or, you know, an artifact of something that's, you know, that's occurred. But, you know, here in the beginning, again, the first thing we get is this. And the thing with the return that I think I was telling you about whenever we were first watching it was that I was incredibly fascinated by how there seems to be like 3 layers of occurrences. You know, there were really at least two overlapping worlds. And this is a question, maybe there's a third here. But the overlapping worlds are the ones, there's the FBI, and then there is this, you know, as this concept gets slowly revealed to us. We've seen a little bit of it in Fire Walk with Me, so I don't feel bad going straight to this, but there's this concept of the blue rose. But the FBI exists on a plane where they're interacting with these entities from this other world, but yet also we have this scrunched world that's in the middle. And so we have this jail cell. We have Buckthorn, South Dakota. That seems pretty mundane. And that could, in fact, be just sort of the normal world. I mean, I say we're a long way from Twin Peaks, but some of these characters, like these characters, are in the same world as Twin Peaks, as the people who live in Twin Peaks are. This is sort of like, you know, it's like Bill. You know, look, we talked about how you get this character. He's done the fuck around stage, and now he's in the find out stage. His sudden interaction with this, you know, whatever is going on in this other plane of existence. This is one of these instances that moors the two together. And I think really it's important. I don't know how important it is for everything, but I think it's important that this character is seeing these other things. You know, from the viewer perspective, what we're doing is abolishing, you know, the separation of worlds that could potentially exist in the metaphysics of the series. You know, these two worlds are aware of each other. Man, that was a lot of talking.
Yeah, it's sort of for some reason I think of there's a Swedish writer philosopher called Emanuel Swedenborg, and he wrote a book called Heaven and Its Wonders and Hell from Things Heard and Seen. And for some reason, I that sort of keeps echoing when I'm thinking about what you were saying and thinking about the sort of the way that these various worlds blend. And it's a feature of many of Lynch's works, again, this sort of tenuous where the veil, it reference to, the veil between worlds, as you well know, living in a place where that veil is very thin. And so in many of Lynch's works, again, the veil is thin. And so there is always this sort of crossover and confusion and interrelationship. And to me, of course, it's a way that Lynch's work sort of enters a mythological space that I think is sort of ancient. It's an ancient way of thinking of storytelling and thinking of the world, as with, sort of works in the classical period, there's just a very easy and overlapping interaction between the gods and the mortals, and in a way, I think that's something we see here. I tend to think of, so interesting enough, these woodsman characters, the prototype of them actually appears in Fire Walk with Me. So people recall there's a scene in Fire Walk with Me where you actually see the room over the convenience store, where as David Bowie in character as Philip Jeffries in Fire Walk with Me says, I've been to one of their meetings. And then, of course, you see these scenes, and of course, all these figures. The Bob is there, and Mrs. Chalfont, and the little David Lynch mini-me that lives with Mrs. Chalfont, or Mrs. Tremond. She has two names, and the jumping man with the white mask with the long pointy nose. So all of those kind of spirit characters are there, and the little man from another place is there. But also you see one that you never saw in the television series, the original two seasons, which is a guy dressed as a woodsman, as a logger. He has a long black beard, and he's wearing, this sort of flannel, and he's got the hat on and everything. But notably, he just looks like a normal, he's not burnt. I think the notable thing is all the woodsmen in The Return are as if they have been through a fire. And notably, whenever they appear, there's a fire. There's smoke, and there's where there's smoke, there's fire. And so often when in fact, these characters, you only ever hear them say one thing, which is "got a light." Well, you hear them say something else, but the "got a light" is the kind of leitmotif of these things. Again, sort of an invitation to sparking a fire. And they're smoking, and of course they're covered in soot, and there's a very real sort of olfactory sense about them. Whenever you tend to see them, there tends to be lots of smoke. There's a scene where you see them milling in and about the convenience store, and it's wreathed in smoke. So I do think that there's some sort of relationship between, the idea of the fireman and these burnt woodsmen. I don't know. Any thoughts, Brood?
I think there's also a callback we're kind of missing here. Maybe I'm looking far too much into it, but keep in mind, like, he's at the foot of the bed, and he is now making himself known to a very scared and very shaken man who has just been informed of someone dying that he's been accused of, and of course is now like tangentially related to this case. And we see this also when in the first run of the show, when Sarah Palmer, Sarah Palmer sees Bob for the first time while she's hugging Donna Hayward, and the vision shows Bob at the foot of Laura's bed. And the whole other question about like Laura's abilities is a whole other one, but my point here is that we're seeing an otherworldly entity, maybe or tangentially associated with the deaths that have taken place here. And of course there's the greater relationship with Doppelganger Cooper and everything else. And I kind of find that a deliberate callback. And like you had also mentioned with Fire Walk with Me, like we have these woodsmen who have clearly, and of course we're going to see this guy a lot later in one of the most amazing art pieces ever put to screen. But I think for Lillard's character, right, he's also now being exposed to the fact that there is something well beyond his control. And as we find out later in this episode, how he has been set up is also going to play a much larger role because of Mr. C coming up and taking care of business. So I don't know. This is just like what both of you had mentioned, like the thin line, the veil, so to speak, between the world of Twin Peaks and the otherworldliness of these entities is very up close and personal for regular people now, because Lillard's character, whose name escapes me, he would definitely be an average person. It seems like any person would be freaked the absolute hell out by seeing one of these things while in a jail cell, while being accused of killing some strange librarian that you barely see from your work at the local school. And the other thing too, with like Fire Walk with Me, like there's this weird, like I'm talking Old Testament, you know, like the heavenly council, or in this instance, like an evil council has like come together in this heavenly court or otherworldly court in this room above the upper rooms that are now sort of deciding the fate of man, or wanting to test them. And unfortunately for this poor fuck, he's been caught in the middle of it, and he doesn't really, he doesn't have the best ends either right now or later in the series.
Indeed. I should note though, is that he doesn't actually see the woodsman here. So because you can see there's so what happens is that the camera is on Hastings, and he's, you know, upset and crying, whatever, and then the camera it tracks over to the next cell, and you can see there's like a kind of separated there. He does sort of like register that he hears something, but he doesn't actually see the woodsman. In fact, the woodsman, right after you see him, right as you see him here, he disappears as his head actually sort of floats away like a balloon. So it's a kind of curious moment where he's sort of, and I'm going back to the sort of olfactory. I mean, I just can't ever look at the woodsman without just imagining that they smell like an extinguished campfire, you know, or you know, with a top note of burning hair. And I just imagine that Hastings, of course, was probably aware of that. And remember that scent is a big thing with particularly certain people's perception of these otherworldly figures in all of Twin Peaks. Remember when Bob appeared, people smelt burning, like they always said it smelled like burning engine oil. And in fact, that brutal episode where Maddie Ferguson meets her end, she runs down the stairs under the fan and says, "Was something burning? What is that smell, Uncle Leland? Is something burning?" And again, back to the burning and the fire, a primal motif. So let's see. So then his wife, Hastings' wife, who of course we learn is in on this, or at least she's aware that he was being set up. And Hastings actually speaks with his lawyer, whose name is all I can remember his name is George. And of course we learn that he and Hastings' wife are having some sort of relationship, you know, unbeknownst to Paul Hastings. And so she returns home, probably satisfied that the plan is working. And look who is in her house. Why, it's our old friend. It's our old friend, the Bad Dale, as Annie would have called him in the old season 2. And he speaks to her and says, "Of course, you did good." And then he says, "This is George's gun," and he tosses it on the floor. And unfortunately, then he shoots her with it, and then he tosses her on the floor. So, of course, her part in this plan, and of course, I mentioned last week that this character was played by Catherine, by Cornelia Guest, who Sandy took a liking to, I think.
Yeah. I took a liking to Andy Warhol's photographic portraits of her.
Yeah.
But this is this is one of the things where I always like to grab. This is against my nature to do this, but I love doing it. This is a scene where, Evil Dale, he takes on the aspect of a character that is so similar to Cormac McCarthy's Anton Chigurh that I can't not say anything about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, never thought of that.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I never thought of it.
Okay, so I don't know if this is unconscious or if it's intentional. But again, what we have here is this. I mean, we have this character that presents as I think you try to think about it in Dungeons and Dragons terms, and this is probably the first and only time I'm ever going to make a Dungeons and Dragons reference on any stream ever. Period. But if you imagine who is the worst character, like what is the worst alignment, and you have to come to the conclusion that lawful evil is the worst. Okay, and and both of these characters now get presented here in this very unsettling way, where their actions are pretty much just pure cruelty, but there's also like this like lingering hint of an unspoken actual sort of like framework or code that's binding them to it, that sort of makes it even more unsettling than sort of random violence. So it's like, okay, like if you imagine the scene differently, say the drug dealers from Las Vegas are there or whatever, and you find that they're there's a random element there. But there's an actual there's the implication of a code that we can't see and don't understand that's operating on Evil C here.
Yeah, I never thought of the.
It's so close, man.
Yeah,
it's so close when you think about it. It's like, huh.
Interesting. Also, I just slipped this in, because if you note the wound, I've deliberately tried never to read any kind of analysis because I didn't want to be sort of clouded by that. It's inevitable that will happen. But I do remember reading a few things where it was mentioned how that you often see, so you see how there's that slight sort of halo around Laura's right eye there, and a lot of people have made mention of that in relation to the wound on Mrs. Hastings' head and other things in the show. And there's other kind of larger conspiracy theories about the one black eye, the ring around the eye. I don't know if people can look into that at their own time. Panda eyes. Yeah. Anyway, you have anything to add, Prude?
She her wound looks very similar to the way in which the librarian's head is taken care of in regards to the eye or how it is shot. And then I agree with Sandbatch's take that like we're introduced to very cruel, very deliberately sadistic enemies that do abide by a system, and there are rules, and the audience, like if you're watching this for the first time, the audience is then suddenly like, oh, there are certain games being played here or rules. I hate to make a reference to something so well known, but like the opening to The Dark Knight, where everyone's playing their part, but they don't know in the bank robbery scene that they're all supposed to eliminate one another. So there's only really one guy who collects all the money, and you did good, and now everything that you had done to do it falls apart, and your end of the bargain's up, and you have to die. And she clearly wasn't prepared for it. Also, too, the smoke that comes out from her, I don't know how. I've never had to shoot anybody like that, obviously, so I don't have any reference for how that might look when you kill somebody like that. But the way in which her head goes and the way in which the wound moves, it reminds me very much of similar ways that I think other entities interact in this world when reacting to physical or kinetic force. So it was just, I wonder how much she was under control of something, or if she was a separate entity in and of itself operating on, a deal or a promise. You're left wondering, and you're going to be wondering a lot of these kind of rules for some time.
Yeah, I don't know, about the forensic reality of that. I mean, keep in mind she was fleeing, and actually this is the exit wound. So, perhaps, but
wait,
yeah.
hold on. Again, from the meta perspective, though, real quick, I would just point out that this is okay. So now, you're at an hour. First episode, an hour, and rolling into the second episode now. In normal circumstances, you're thinking in terms of a film. This is already, and David Lynch's films are actually beautifully geometric this way. Actually, I've timed them, and he frequently structures them almost perfectly, such that they exist in like thirds. So there's an opening third, middle third, and closing third. In most cases, okay, you're on your second hour of runtime right now. You would actually already need to be moving into the crisis point of whatever story you're trying to tell. But he is an hour and running into an 18-hour story at this point. So like there is no point in the first couple of episodes where you imagine like a magician, starting or like a magician starting a show or something like that. He who comes out with his bag of tricks and starts pulling items out and putting them on the desk. There is no slowdown in these first episodes. He pulls out an enormous number of pieces and just lays them, and then just kind of lets them sit there for a while. So like the slow pacing of everything can be maddening, and it can be maddening. It's almost like sometimes it's like a list of ships in the Iliad or something like that. But you're always aware every time he pulls out another one of these pieces and puts it on the desk that like this story is getting incredibly complex. And one of the beautiful things it does, and I'll point this out as we go along, one of the beautiful things this does is that over the course of the series, he builds up such a complicated web of like sort of overlapping narrative that you start to develop anxiety about whether or not it's even possible to finish this. But he's like well into the upswing of it here.
Yeah, and when I first went on this journey with him, of course, I mean, you feel really rudderless for quite a long time. It's just like, well, again, it's called Twin Peaks: The Return. You're promised a return. And, but again, as you say, there's so many other things. There's so much scaffolding being moved into place. And the experience I had, of course, was that actually watching it 4 or 5 times, it starts to get actually sort of weirdly simple. Like I can even now in my head, even though it's so complex, I can still sort of the arc of the narrative of it and the connectivity between the various aspects of it. It seems simple the more you kind of kind of follow it, which is strange because of course it's absolutely, at least for me, it was absolutely bewildering on the first go. So there's probably something to that. The other thing, of course, is that maybe I mentioned last week, but there's a sense of temporal instability, always in David Lynch's work. You're not quite sure. I mean, as we know, in the final spoken line in Twin Peaks: Return is, "What year is this?" And I think that sort of encapsulates often a feeling that, again, you're not fixed in time, and it could, I mean, you think about films like Blue Velvet, where it's like 1987, but it's also like 1950, 52. Like there's this, again, this weird sort of, as I said, just temporal instability. And I think about that in terms of, you're watching an 18-hour meditation, an 18-hour work, and of course the pacing is going to be very different from a story that you have to finish up in 2 hours. And I think of, again, strangely enough, with Cornelia Guest there being a protege and friend of Andy Warhol, I think, of course, some of Andy Warhol's sort of quote underground films in the early 1960s. One of them is, I mean, his first one was called Sleep, which is about 8 hours of a man sleeping. Just the camera sort of trained on his face. He made another film called Empire, which was a sort of middle distance shot of the Empire State Building for 8 hours. And, again, it was sort of an exercise in, I mean, I think Warhol himself once sort of compared it to the idea of watching clouds. He said, well, I just wanted to sort of make sort of concrete the strange postmodern, well, I don't think he said that, but that's my interpretation, but the strange kind of how this would change. You think of lying in the grass on a beautiful day, staring at the sky for hours, and watching the clouds drift and change. And then you think of, well, what's a sort of mediated equivalent of that? It's a black and white 8 hour 16mm film of a building. And what's strange about it, again, I think, is sort of like the physics concept of time dilation, in that, if you actually sit and watch it, and I have, sadly enough, the entirety of that film, Empire, but any change becomes like absolutely monumental, because the one big thing that happens You know, nothing ever happens until it does. And the thing that happens in that is that the sky grows dark, and at a certain point, the exterior lights on the Empire State Building come on. And it's just like the biggest thing in the world because, of course, you have become attuned to nothing. You have become attuned to something that's almost a static moment. And then, of course, you start to think of time in a different way. And again, it's analogous to sitting on the porch for hours and looking at nothing, looking at the leaves turn in the breeze. And so I think you get an interesting sort of David Lynch has to start to play with temporal elements. And I think I do recall some people getting very impatient with the pacing of certain elements of Twin Peaks: The Return, but it's something to think about.
No, I mean it's incredible when you talk about, because you talk about maybe punishing the audience a little bit. This is like the first seasons of Twin Peaks are structured relatively mundanely, like a television show, and here like it's like it's a very interesting, because I've talked to you about this, how I'm obsessed in a certain way with for instance things how movies that are just on films, how they lock you into a certain like sort of temporality just by the basic fact of you required to view it, you require this film to be projecting forward, linearly. And you have the same sort of constraints with, classically with the television series or something like that. In this case, that's gone. Okay. And so what he's actually doing is working against the conventions of the medium. The medium wants it wants a lot of slop is really what it wants. Television writing requires a lot of slop. And what he's doing instead is choosing to not honor the unspoken agreement of how a television series is structured. It's beautiful.
Yeah, because of course, in a way, I mean, television as it used to be is basically extinct, or certainly dying. So, in a way, when you work for these entities like Showtime, or as in the case of this, or HBO, or any of them, whatever, you're given much more like sort of leeway to explore a story with a different pacing, because of course it's not so necessary to stick to the 48 minutes or 44 minutes or whatever, and allowing time for adverts, so you're sort of freed from he's freed from some of the exigencies of making a television show in 1990. Let's move on. We also meet a new character here, and this guy is his name is Duncan Todd, which again, I'm just thinking back to names. I'm thinking about William Hastings. I mentioned last week, of course, William the Conqueror and the Battle of Hastings. We get Duncan Todd. Of course, Duncan famously is the name of the king who is slain in Macbeth, and of course, Todd in German, Todd means death, Tod. And I also think of Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street. So I do think that in playing with them, I mean, they're almost Dickensian, some of the character names in this series. Also, of course, the minute I saw this guy, he is so fixed in my head from that famous scene in Mulholland Drive. If you've ever seen it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I don't want to spoil Mulholland Drive for you, but he is in a notable scene in that. But he plays this enigmatic character called Duncan Todd, who, is in this very posh-looking office, and he's obviously in charge of something very important. And of course, we learn through various pieces that fall into place over the series what's going on. But when we first meet him again, we're not sure who he is, what he's doing. I also love seeing his office, because you see those two objects, the red, and then in the background there's another kind of lamp glowing gold. Those are both David Lynch's. David Lynch built lamps. He built a whole series of lamps, and actually all through his life he's constructed furniture, household objects, things like that. He did a lot of work in his own wood shop, but yeah, sort of in the mid 2010s, he created this whole series of these sculptural lamps, and those are two of them. So I think is notable. I also have a side theory, by the way, and you can kind of kind of keep your own notes as we go along, that every character has their own lamp. Basically, almost without fail, every character at some point in some scene, and usually with them in many scenes, they're associated with a particular lamp, a particular style, type of lamp from a certain period in a certain condition. And the lamp thing, of course, is something else that goes all through David Lynch's work. I mean, Mulholland Drive, for instance, the lamps are all over the place and they actually become very important. In fact, as you mentioned on the first episode, there's that weird little like list that was a feature on the original DVD of Mulholland Drive, where it's like David Lynch's things that will help you unlock the mysteries of Mulholland Drive, and one of them is, of course, pay attention to the red lampshade. So anyway, you can watch along as we go along and see if you can spot each character's not leitmotif, but lamp motif.
Lamp motif. It's also worth pointing out that we're in Las Vegas now.
Yeah, in Vegas, yeah.
And this is, if you're looking for empty space on the American, you're looking for just the worst place in the world. I mean, I'm sorry, if you're like the worst, most nowhere place, Las Vegas internationally stands for nothing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always think of it, you know, I mean, it's the liminal space, the city, you know, it's just, it's just, yeah. Anyway,
so again, like a lot of things are just being stacked up on top of one another. They're being layered. So there's liminal spaces everywhere, and then there's sort of this jokey thing where it's actually we're going into the real liminal space now. So as part of this story happens in Las Vegas, and you are again, you're just shoved directly into this very bewildering, like, sort of narrative that doesn't really do anything to explain itself initially.
Yep. So here we get to meet, sort of Evil Dale's associates here. Of course, you know, again, sort of twinned with, you know, the idea of the wholesome setting of Norma Jennings's Double R diner back in Twin Peaks. Well, of course, they're meeting in a diner, but it's that's notably not Norma Jennings. And we meet Dahlia, you know, who seems to be Evil Dale's mole, and we meet other characters, Ray, who becomes important here, and then the fourth character, whose name, what is his name? Who's sort of silent, and I only remember him specifically because there's a weird scene where Evil Dale plays with his face. Do you remember that? Does anyone remember that scene? They're outside of like a storage unit, and Dale just sort of like grabs his cheeks.
Yeah.
It's very odd. Yeah, and so we get a very, I think, a very nice little bit of dialogue that basically summarizes the character of doppelganger Dale. You know, Ray says, you know, something like, just the offhand way you would say, well, what do you need? And of course, I don't need anything, Ray. There's one thing you should know about me, Ray. I don't need anything. I want. And I think that's quite significant. Again, if you think about Dale's doppelganger as a kind of archetype of human appetite, you know, this idea of a character of pure want, I think is notable. And also, again, sort of sets up his morality, of which I don't really think he has one. But any thoughts about this scenario?
Well, that gives me big thing, but I have to think that I have to digest it now. Unfortunately, that landed right on the buttons of something I'm writing about, so it's gonna have to appear in writing.
I think it's important. I mean, it's important to note that it's not anything specific. I mean, it's not a general statement. It's about information. The Ray says you must really want this piece of info. And that's sort of what sets him off, because, and it's not just like, oh, it's an archetype of appetite. I think that's certainly true, but also we're getting to see if we have an evil doppelganger who is considered the paragon of moral virtue of the FBI, which is a contradiction in terms in real life, but at the very least we get a detective here, kind of, because he wants information, he's investigating something. Ray realizes that he has leverage over Mr. C. And we know that this guy isn't afraid to kill. We have no idea, although we find out later on in the series, what he has done for the last 25 years since Dale Cooper's been left alone waiting in the lodge. And so we get to see just like this is the way in which the only way you can control him, which is with information. And that's the only thing that keeps you alive around Mr. C or Evil Cooper, however you want to describe him. And in doing so, that's sort of the real dividing line here is that information was always so vital to understanding the secrets or the mysteries of what was going on in the original run. But in this instance, it's more of we're trying to prevent him from engaging in his own tactics, his own beliefs, his own sort of man on a mission type deal here. And we find out much later on that the clock is ticking for Evil Cooper just as it is for everyone else, especially with Dale's storyline.
Yeah, and I do think it's notable that we learn, much later that Mr. C actually does need something. In fact, his existence depends upon it. So again, maybe not the entire truth. I mean, he wants something, but in the end, of course, he desperately needs it for reasons that we'll come upon. One thing what Matty G in the comments earlier noted or talked about Mr. C's wardrobe. I know from listening to behind the scenes talk from this show that the Mr. C's various outfits, you'll notice the shirt, which is actually, if you look at it, it's a snakeskin pattern, and that was a deliberate homage to the character in to Nicolas Cage's character in Wild at Heart, Sailor. So who notably wears a snakeskin jacket. So I think it was actually Kyle MacLachlan who suggested throwing in that little reference to Sailor. So there you go. And of course we meet Margaret Lanterman again. Also note her lamp, but she again throughout many episodes from now till the sort of later part of the series, there's an ongoing conversation between her and Deputy Hawk through the telephone, of course, and in the show, of course, she was dying, and the actress, as we noted last episode, was also dying, and she finished her scenes 4 days before her death. But what interests me, I mean, of course, is Sandbatch pointed out to me in private conversations that I didn't put much. There's a whole storyline full of characters, and you see some of them, but many of them you don't see. You only know because they have conversations about things that happen, but it's all things that you never see. Like, you don't see half the characters, you don't see almost any of the things that they're talking about, and these conversations take place at the what you call it, Bang Bang, the Roadhouse.
Roadhouse.
Yeah, at the end of each episode. So many of the early episodes are capped off by a musical performance and these strange scenes with strange scenes of millennials sitting of various types. Some of them, sort of looking middle class. Some of them decidedly not so. Having conversations about characters and things that are never actually a part of the show. And I never thought about it until Sandbatch actually noted that very interesting fact that, it's this idea that there's this whole parallel world. In fact, the way it's presented is very much like the soap opera, the continuing story. What did Billy do to Sarah? And what of this and what of that, and so it's almost like that. Again, these characters are having the recap of their own television show that we don't ever get to see. We get to hear it referenced, and I think that's a fascinating thing. Again, these parallel stories and the idea that, of course, there are these various narratives happening that cross over only in this sort of space, at the end, this sort of exhalation at the end of each of these episodes, and very much also, I mean, again, the conversations between Margaret Lanterman and Hawk, another example of this, where there's a kind of parallel narrative. In the case of Margaret Lanterman, I mean, she's literally like an oracle. You know, she's like the oracle of Delphi. You know, in breathing the fumes and giving these half understood revelations from the world not seen to Hawk. So these sort of parallel worlds and parallel stories are an interesting feature.
Now the Hawk Log Lady story, I mean, that's your main twin. I mean, there's a discernible narrative there. I think it's interesting that he chooses these two characters out of his previous timeline to focus on, because they're not by any means the most likely, you know. But you know, I'm only going to focus on one of these roadhouse scenes at the end, and I would point to, like, if they're not totally separated from the events that are occurring. But one of the things is that if you follow my, like, there are several sort of theotic, they're maybe Gnostic even, actually. There are several, like, to rescue this story from Gnosticism. These worlds need to cross over, and if you really listen, there are some echoes in these conversations that give you indications of what the sort of moral fable, or what the moral positioning of the entire, like, series The Return is. But they are given to you as though you're just being told stories about people whose names you already know. Okay, like, this is the thing that's done is that there's no the only reason they seem disorienting is because there's no introduction to the characters. It's just assumed that you know the names of the characters. But what's really interesting is that if you just discount the fact that you don't know the names of the characters, that they're sometimes talking about things that actually are roughly in parallel with what's going on elsewhere in the series. Okay, and there's one instance where I'm thinking of that involves a car accident. But
yeah, actually, I took screenshots of that one because that's the one that stood out for me.
That's the one that was my favorite scene in the whole series. So whenever we get there, I'll probably go crazy on that. But wow. The other thing that's going on is that, you know, like I said, you have to create this world. Most of your Twin Peaks content is this. I mean, this is your, like, Twin Peaks: The Return. If you want to let's go back to Twin Peaks and see what's happening. That's what's happening in Twin Peaks, you know. And what it does, I think Prude was talking last time about how there's this, like, it's about how, like, you're no longer living in this world of, like, 1991 or whatever. The original series does a pretty good job of, you know, presenting the, like, Winesburg, Ohio tier, presenting the machinations inside this small town. Well, let's see what that looks like in the year 2015. And it's like it's different. It all, like, you know, almost everything interesting comes to us by way of this, you know, I hate to use this phrase, you're going to kill me, third space. And but everything happens there, and we do get this, like, sort of pretty good idea of, like, what monoculture is. Like, this is the millennial version of it, however dumb that is, you know. Like, it's like, you know, gossips on cell phones and things like that. Everybody's drinking beer, and there's hipster bands playing. Like, it's a remarkably good it's a remarkably, like faithful and actually sort of positive and somewhat hopeful representation of things that, to me, from the distance of 10 years, don't, like, I remember them not being as cheery as that. But it's great to see David Lynch actually able to sort of paste together something of coherence out of the 2010s, which he does right there. And I think it's incredible. I think it's the coolest things he does in The Return are these little vignettes at the end.
For me, as a peak Gen X person, one of the more disturbing things about Twin Peaks: The Return was seeing, and you, in fact, I took screenshots. So there's a few moments in the series where you realize that the town is now, like, inhabited by sort of hipster millennials. It's really jarring. It's worse than the Woodsman, you know, having a gaggle of, you know, sort of millennials with problem glasses.
Well, there's something really important there, John D. There's something really important there. And it's like, what, would you change the past if you could? What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do to prevent this from being what you got?
Well, and as we learn, that's not always a good idea to meddle with things like that.
I think the other thing too, in this scene in particular, is that, as we saw in the first episode, Lynch just takes these two characters specifically because they embody two very unique archetypes. One is a callback, obviously, to the log lady archetype, as we saw from the first episode. Like, she's returned as herself. She is playing a very oracle character. She is a sage. She is offering instruction. But also, like, if we take a look at just sort of the history of like Native Americans in television, and Lynch had grown up perfectly at this time with, like, the Lone Ranger.
Yeah,
that you're going to see a Native American playing onto the fact that they're tapped into something that perhaps just by nature of their blood or just being there much longer than us Europeans will be, that they're tied to the land and that they're going to know something. And I've reflected on this archetype so many times before, is that the meme about the difference between a European forest and an American forest is a very real one, because there is somewhat of an eldritch horror to it, despite the fact that there are like countless hundreds of European folk tales and cryptids, or whatever you want to call them, that can inflict unfathomable pain and suffering on like your average like village peasant that lives a little too close to the woods. But in America, like, it's different because of our colonial history, wherein not only are there Indians around the corner, but you have God knows what else, because you don't actually know what's out there. And we still play those sort of tropes to this day about what the forest can do. And multiple traditions will tell you that that's where the spirits like to live, are the forests and in the waters and the streams. And so, like, for here, we're not only giving a little slice of life, which I think is a really nice sort of peaceful kind of like respite from everything else going on. Like when she says, "I have coffee and pie for you," or she asks, "How are you doing?" or "How's life?" or even the Roadhouse scenes at the end, where everyone kind of gets to come together and catch up, and we all get to see everybody. There's this like lovely bit of familiarity, like to borrow Sandbatch's point about like the third space or the third place, like these brief pauses are the third place for the audience, because it's like, oh, there's something familiar, there's something safe, we can all go back to this. Like, oh, coffee and pie, oh, there's a diner, oh, there's the Roadhouse, there's music playing just in the same way music played in the first run of the series. And at the same time, like, this is the information that leads Hawk to go out on patrol from, his sort of warning to do so at the beginning about Dale Cooper. And he'll come across the same sort of foresty area where we had encountered the lodge, 25 years ago.
Yeah, which is the next slide, strangely enough. Yeah, the other thing that, of course, occurs to me, well, two things occur to me. One, I never noticed before, but the log lady has two telephones. Did you notice that? There's like two different phone systems there on the table.
I feel like I noticed it at the time, but what is that? That's too much. My brain can only.
All right, yeah, I'm just gonna let's note that, but I don't want to think about it at the moment. I don't know if it's a continuity error, but she's got she's got two phases. The other thing, of course, I mean, mentioning that many of these characters have a slightly archetypal quality. I mean, Mr. C is just like the sort of perfect 80s 90s inflected dirtbag crime kingpin type, but also the of course, the wise Indian deputy. But in true Lynch fashion, there's a postmodern twist. But even in the original two series, much of the supernatural aspects of Twin Peaks were sort of revolved around these native traditions of the area. I don't know if they ever specified which tribes were involved, but given the location, it would have been, you could surmise what it was. But of course, even though it's all sort of related to these ancient legends, what are the spirits that inhabit it? Well, it's a greasy, long-haired man wearing denim, or it's a dwarf wearing a little red suit. I mean, it's the Venus Pudica, it's the Saturn lamp from the 1939 World's Fair. It's strangely, of course, all of the manifestations of these ancient legends are like thoroughly infected with pan-European culture.
It's interesting. Maddie G says I'm in Mr. C's Walter White, whatever his name is, Sopranos, but subverted. I don't know about that. I think you're in the mythic register. You're in the mythic register. You have to be, because there are no needs, only desires. Or wants. I would like to make a distinction between wants and desires, but no, I will not explain why I felt like I needed to make that distinction. Yeah.
So here we are, of course, back in what is it called? Glastonbury Grove, I think, is the name of this place. And it is, of course, the place where, the interface between this world and the Black Lodge happens, around a pool of oil, notably, surrounded by sycamore trees. In fact, one of my favorite songs associated with the Lynch universe, with the Twin Peaks universe, is on the soundtrack for Fire Walk With Me, and it's a song called Under the Sycamore Trees. And if you've not heard it, you should seek it out. It's on YouTube. It's quite haunting. Sung by a man named Jimmy Scott, who had a career in the 1960s as he had some sort of developmental disorder which prevented him from ever going through puberty. And so he had, as a result, he was called Little Jimmy Scott in his youth, but he had an extraordinarily high, slightly ethereal voice. And when Lynch and Angelo Badalamenti, another genius, had him sing this song for the soundtrack, it's really haunting. So, but here we are, under the sycamore trees, where the dark wind blows, and of course, this is a lead into a very familiar place, which we have been assuming that we revisit, and here it comes. I want to say, I don't think this counts as the comfy third space, but I mean, for Twin Peaks fans, I have to say there's a certain here we go again. Maybe you don't want to actually come here and lounge around and drink the coffee, because as we know, the coffee isn't so good in the Black Lodge. But anyway, it was nice seeing it again. I just remember. And who do we meet? Of course, we meet Mike, or the one-armed man, who, of course, gives, I think, one of the key lines of the series, which is it future or is it past? A question that hangs in the air, I think, through this whole series.
One thing that's really interesting here is that this, for the Cooper doesn't, he places a startling amount of trust and actual acts on things that he is told in the Black Lodge in this sequence here. And this is one of the questions that I have about the series, is what is it about this? What is compelling here? We'll keep going. Maybe I brought that up a little early, but what is compelling here? What makes him decide? For instance, the one-armed man here. Why does he decide that this is a character that he can possibly trust? There almost seems to be a level of trust that's built that exists here that I can't.
In fact, Sandy, that's always been a question, actually, from the original series. Is I've always wondered. I don't know, Prude, maybe you have any thoughts on this, whether Mike is a quote good guy or a neutral figure or a bad guy. Now he is cast. I mean, at least ostensibly, we learn his story because he becomes a human. He is not when you encounter him in the original series. Of course, he's like a real human. He's incarnate and present in the world. But you also learn that he made a decision because he was once aligned with, of course, the great evil in Twin Peaks, which is Bob, or at least we think it's Bob. It was, by his own admission, party to all the horrible things that Bob has done over however many thousands of years or hundreds of years, or as we learn, maybe 50 years. And so he describes, if people remember, he cut off his arm, which had a tattoo on it. And you actually learn this story in Fire Walk with Me, I think. In the original series, he talks about cutting off his arm, and then he talks about the tattoo, but then he cries because he said it said mom, so there's this kind of misdirection. But in Fire Walk with Me, he's presented ostensibly as a character who freed himself from the taint of evil and now maybe is back to try to defeat Bob or thwart Bob's actions in the world. But I'm never so sure whether he's good or bad. Now, the other thing, of course, I always found notable is that he is a shoe salesman in the original series, literally a dealer in souls, because there's a big plot point made about a boot print and they're investigating, trying to find out who produced these souls. So it always struck me that Mike is an itinerant seller of souls. But I don't know. I do have the same question as you, Sandbatch. Because I always was under the impression that the Black Lodge was populated by malevolent forces. So
well,
I don't know.
I think everybody knows my understanding. Well, not everybody, because not everybody listens to me, but my understanding of it is that it is analogous to what is, to me, one of the most interesting themes in English narrative history, which is the concept of the Perilous Chapel. Like, to me, if you know the story of the Perilous Chapel, okay, so the Perilous Chapel, it appears first in the Arthurian legends. It's about 10 of the Arthurian legends, but it's one of the last stages. It's one of the last Grail. It's one of the last quests that the Grail quester has to undertake before arriving at the Fisher King's palace. And so, but there's a lot of pageantry around this, and the only thing that really binds Perilous Chapel experiences together is that there's an experience inside that's fraught with danger, and you either survive or don't. Okay, it was just it's really the very first liminal space. I hate using this phrase because it's such a de-dimensionalization, but for most people who aren't going to go read Le Mort d'Arthur, it's the best way to imagine it. And it reappears over and over. And this is a particularly pure appearance of it. Okay, but this is also the Black Lodge sequence, I think, when he runs into Leland Palmer, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So again, we have this situation where Cooper is in. This is what if in terms of the Grail quest. Okay, it's understood that Cooper is in the Black Lodge here. So, what's happening inside the Black Lodge? Different things happen. Actually, he speaks to a character called the Arm here, and famously one of the sections, one of the iterations of the Arthurian legend, the encounter in the Perilous Chapel is with a disembodied hand. So there's all kinds of symbolism that's stitching this. This is a Perilous Chapel construction with big neon lights over it. Everybody knows this is what this is. So it's almost certainly intended. But inside we find our struggling hero, our struggling questor, and he's given information. He's given a task. What is his task? What is it when he runs into Leland Palmer? What is it? What does he say to him?
Leland says, "Oh, are you asking, or are you setting it up?"
I'm setting it up,
okay,
but I'm asking. No, I'm asking too.
He says, "Find Laura," is what he says.
Save her.
Yeah. Whose idea is that? Okay, why are you? Cooper seems to make a decision at this point to entwine himself even further into the world of this, because now he's taking things that characters inside this Black Lodge tell him seriously, and he's about to go act on them, which is really fascinating. It's a fascinating decision.
Well, he's also, remember, of course, in the story, the good Cooper has been trapped in here for 25 years. And we don't know, again, how time plays out. I mean, the interesting thing, of course, is that there seems to be some effects of time because, of course, everyone looks old now. Cooper ages visibly, and even in the original series, the there are scenes of Cooper in the Black Lodge where he's got age makeup. They've aged him, so it's curious that and that Mike, it has also aged, visibly. So I just wonder about time passing, this idea of time passing. There's, of course, to bring up one of your favorite references, Sandbatch, in Lord of the Rings, when the Fellowship visits Lothlorien, the home of Galadriel and Celeborn, the time is different. And so when you're there, time passes in a different way than it does outside of Lothlorien. So actually, when they leave, they realize they've been in there much longer than they thought they were, And so I wonder, again, what the sort of relationship with the Black Lodge and temporality is. And of course, what has he been thinking about? What has he been doing for all these years, because he knows, at least, that Laura, or some shade of Laura, or Laura's cousin, as she's called, is in here. He knows she's in here. I guess he hasn't seen her for all those years, but he saw her, of course, notably at the end. He saw lots of people. So it's quite curious. And speak of the devil. Yes, who is the next person he meets? Why, it's Laura. Is it Laura? Maybe Laura. Could be Laura. And again, for people who were just waiting to go back into Twin Peaks, always exciting to see her again. But maybe not a good thing. I don't know.
Well, I think the other thing too, to sort of look at all this, is going to be, we found out, that the last time we see Leland is his death, really. And this is the tragic admission of, he has been under the possession or control of Bob for God knows how long. And on top of this, it's been years of him harming his daughter. And it's not a pretty way to go either, in terms of just your life and what you've been subject to. And so when you see a man that's potentially him, or at least is on the other side, giving you a mission, and God only knows what you've been doing for the last 25 years, right? Save her. Sure, sounds like an appealing thing to do. Why wouldn't you try? I'm in a place where I don't really understand the rules, but there is a potential opportunity to correct the wrongs that have been happening. And if, even if one death is reversed, Laura's, we have to remind ourselves at the very beginning of all of this, that Laura is not the first victim of Bob, or at least it's certainly not implied to be.
Yeah.
And that's something really important to keep in mind here.
Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, Teresa Banks, who we learn all about, who is mentioned also in The Return at some point. She certainly mentioned, but who we see at the beginning of Fire Walk with Me. Also, again, in Fire Walk with Me, Leland Palmer appears in the lodge at the end, and he receives, I suppose, a sort of absolution. Well, actually, I think that Leland received a kind of absolution when Cooper, remember when he smashed his head, and then Cooper ran in and the sprinklers went off, and then Cooper read from the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and Leland said, he basically Bob had left him, and so he expresses contrition, and so there's a kind of religious absolution, last rites being performed there. But in Fire Walk with Me, Leland appears at the end at the lodge, floating in the air, and the arm, who in that is still Michael Anderson, the little dwarf guy, goes up and puts his hand on Mike's, where the missing arm is, implying that they rejoined for this moment, and they say in unison, "Bob, I want all my Garmon Bozia," which is a word that is spoken several times. And upon doing that, of course, Bob is there, and he is very angry, but he reaches his hand into Leland's abdomen and pulls it out, and all of this giant splatter of blood hits that patterned floor, and then disappears. So again, a sort of symbolic cleansing or final exorcism of Leland. So Leland's state, I think, at the beginning of the story is that, of course, he was a victim and maybe is never allowed to rest again, but he at least seems, again, we don't know, but seems to be, the father, the father, the unpolluted father once again.
And so Dale's given his mission.
And so, yes, the chivalric hero is given his mission to save the princess. And of course, here she is. In fact, this is actually before he sees Leland, keep in mind. And then Laura, or whoever this is, utters, I think, one of the most important phrases of the return. And this is my own personal theory. She says to him, "You can go out now." Right? And what is Dale Cooper's response to this? Of course, is to just sit there. And I am convinced, and you actually hear this line again, and I think this is so important because I think that this was the turning point. It's basically that Laura has returned, and she says, "You can leave. You're free to go." Right? This is before he sees Leland Palmer. This is before he learns any of the other things. Before he meets the arm again, or whatever. Is a shade in the form of Laura Palmer who tells him he can go out. And what does he do? He just sits there and ignores it.
This is the moment of crisis. T.S. Eliot, to have the strength to force the moment to its crisis. This is what happens in the Perilous Chapel. Okay, so there is an encounter, and the implication is always that there is a decision that has to be made. And so there's a decision there's a decision that gets made here that shapes the rest of the series, shapes the rest of the narrative entirely. But also, what happens if we don't have this? Like, what happens if you don't have this scene where, okay, you can go out now? Now you can interpret, you can go out now to be like, in a much more linear way, but that makes it more boring, which is that the conditions are right for you to leave now. Doesn't mean he has to go then. It's much better to interpret it, I think, as a decision where it's like this: you have to make a decision right now. What happens if he gets up and leaves then?
Yeah.
There we go again. If you knew you had freedom, what would you do with it?
What would you do with it? Yeah. And of course, I've got slides of this, because I think this conversation is very important. You'll see what I meant by ignoring her in a moment. So she says this, and then, of course, he doesn't do anything. And so she says, "Do you recognize me?" And then, "Are you Laura Palmer?" And then, of course, she repeats a line, which is a famous line from the original series, where she's seen in the original series in the lodge, and she says, "I feel I know her, but sometimes my arms bend back," and she does a gesture. Here, she just says the line; she doesn't do the pain gesture. And of course, in the original series, Cooper, who got to leave again, surmises that this is a reference to her being bound, and that, of course, she was frequently bound up. As we learned, she had a sort of scandalous personal life of one sort or the other. So we get this line again, and then, "Who are you?" And again, another pointed question where he seems to have not really heard anything that she said. And then, of course, she says right out, "Laura Palmer," right? And so what does Cooper say? Laura Palmer's dead. So a very sort of, almost like Harold Pinter kind of people just talking past one another. And of course, her response to that, I didn't have a screenshot, but she says, "I am dead, yet I live," which of course is another sort of sardonic summary of the entirety of Twin Peaks, which of course was predicated on Laura Palmer being a corpse at the beginning, and yet being the animating force behind 3 seasons of television. And then, of course, my favorite line, after all that, after the invitation which she gave him, which he ignored, he says, "When can I go?" I'm afraid, Dale, you missed your chance. And of course, then we get an intimate interaction, which is again a mirror of something that happened in an earlier series. And then I think another telling moment, which is that she whispers to him. And of course, she does this famously in the original series. And we see images of this shot later on, most notably. In fact, the last image that you ever see of Twin Peaks is this, with all the color drained out of it. And of course, he's learning what looks to be a terrible secret. In the original show, of course, it was more aligned with the whodunit thing, where you kind of learn disappointingly that she whispered, "My father killed me." But I suspect she's whispering something else to him now.
We don't really get to know either. And I mean, like, you can interpret it all you want. I don't think that there's a definitive answer as to what this is. I mean, perhaps the best way to spin it and to make it more tragic is that this Laura, or this version of her, or this avatar of her, tells him that he will not succeed in his mission, but like he's going to do it anyway, which makes the ending or the conclusion of this entire return all the more terrifying, and even more terrifying because Lynch is reposed and we're never going to get this world back.
Yeah.
But we're left unknown, and it's sort of a callback, but I think it's also a reference to, Dale has no idea what a Lolita reference. Well, there you go.
Yeah, there's a very similar scene in Stanley Kubrick's Lita.
Yeah, I didn't think about that when watching this.
And strangely enough, Lynch, the very few films that he cited as his favorite films, he did cite Lolita as one of his favorite films. So Kubrick's Lolita, by the way.
Yeah. I heard, because I wrote down the phrase "I'm dead and yet I live" on my notes when I was watching this, and she is this. It's such a departure from anything that you would see in almost Christian storytelling. I am dead, but yet I live, because that really only applies to like the Messiah. But in this regard, like we're in some otherworldly place. We're not in Hades. We're not in Gehenna. We're in this bizarre waiting room that is very theatrical yet very empty. Not calling it purgatory or anything like that either. But like and then also later as she goes on, like she whispers this to him. And then almost as if she is pulling back the curtain, so to speak, she pulls her face off, and she kind of like offers a transfiguration of sorts. Like, here is this incomprehensible light in a similar way that her mother does later in the series, although it is not the same kind of brightness. And so, she says that you can go now. And let me tell you these things before you leave. And then a literal face reveal followed all with this. And for me, it's like, okay, well, now Laura Palmer is no longer just the human subject, and she's also something far greater. She is both archetype, she is both guide, and she is both cause and mission. She is the treasure that has been laid aside for him to go out and to leave. And of course, Cooper is nowhere near yet leaving and returning back to sort of our reality or our plane of existence. But at the same time, I find this scene to be really important, because not only is it sort of the call to action for Dale, but it's also we as the audience are brought back in a way that is a deliberate callback, but with only more mystery added on. And I don't people can hit on Gnosticism for what they want, but I think in here there's something about like there is so much secret knowledge that Dale has no idea, that has only been given a taste to. Not saying that Dale is going to be some loyal disciple here, but there's certainly some kind of Sophia that he's trying to access to, and maybe he can access it or beat whatever is controlling this knowledge by fulfilling his mission.
We're not gonna talk about Gnosticism, but we could do a little Gnosticism.
We can do a little as a treat, as a treat.
I Tiresias, though blind, throbbing between two lives. So, yeah, for some reason I didn't include the shot of her opening her face, and then of course there's a horrible moment where she is pulled up, screaming, twisting into the air, to the astonishment of Dale Cooper. And whatever has happened, it doesn't seem good. Doesn't seem good. And here we get, of course, the thumbnail for this stream, which is a quite an amazing image. One of, I think, the more striking ones that appears in this series. And of course, we all know the horse. We know the white horse. It's famous image that it appears in the original series. In fact, it's a vision that Sarah Palmer frequently has, generally preceding encounters that are not good at all. The white horse seems to be a premonition of great evil, and of course, she notably sees it several times in the original series.
Behold a pale horse.
Yeah, his rider is death. And then, of course, we meet another character who is called in the credits, it's called the Evolution of the Arm. Now, of course, the existence of this strange entity is partially because of a problem with casting. So Michael Anderson, who played the dwarf in the original series, and of course played a really creepy character in Mulholland Drive, was asked to participate. But let's just say if you follow, I mean, I don't know what he's doing, if he's doing social media now, but it'd be back in 2015, that era when this series was shot. He seemed a little off the rails, and he ended up actually accusing he called David Lynch a murderer and, a rapist and all sorts of terrible things. So sadly, it didn't seem that all was well with Michael Anderson. I don't know if he's gotten help or whatever. But so unfortunately, he was not available for the return. So Lynch, of course, took the opportunity to create this monstrosity, which is a fleshy blob on a sapling, which has a very creepy voice in the show.
This is one of these times where I sometimes maybe I don't get surrealism, man. Okay, and this is one of I do almost nothing but sing David Lynch's praises, but sometimes, and I don't even like Eraserhead. Sometimes it gets too strange and it's too nuts. And if you lose me, then you've lost everybody. So I don't know what he's doing here. No clue. You lost me, David.
Brood, any defense?
I don't really have one. I mean, other than clearly this is a character that's not, it's. I don't know what to make of it other than I don't know, maybe a tree of knowledge or something, someone to let you know more information. But again, I know that a lot of casting choices are made compromises on later because, David Bowie, he had died at this point, right?
No, actually,
no, or he was just too. Or I guess
he was ill, and he
was ill.
Participate.
And so Tom Jeffries later in this series is presented as this giant floating tea kettle. So I just chopped this up to a casting decision that I don't think I'm ever going to get an answer to, other than the character or original cast is unavailable, ill, or dead.
Yeah, I mean, of course, also notably, the original Michael Ontkean, the actor who played the original Sheriff Harry Truman, was retained to be in the return, and then for reasons never explained, pulled out at the last minute. So of course Lynch had to make up a character who's his in the show, who's his brother. But yeah, there were a couple of instances of that. And I think that this was a case of, well, it was originally, obviously it was intended to be Michael Anderson, but it just was not going to work out. This thing, I mean, if anything, it's, if you know David Lynch's artwork, if you know his drawings, if you know some of his sculptures or his paintings, this is very much sort of in line with that. I don't know. it's fine. It's not my favorite. It's not my favorite bit either, but it's okay as CGI. Yeah, Natty G, maybe a sycamore tree. I don't know how you could identify it from this one branch, but it could be a sycamore sapling. Okay, so back into the world of the living for a moment. We actually cut away from the Black Lodge, and we find Mr. C and Dahlia. In fact, she just had a conversation on the telephone from this motel room with Ray, where she, of course, we learn that she is basically going to double cross Mr. C, or is involved in Ray's plan to double cross Mr. C. And of course, Mr. C knows all about this, and so he comes in and confronts her. And as I think one of you said earlier, I mean, the only thing that will keep you alive is if you have what Mr. C wants, which is information. And basically, of course, we learn that Dahlia doesn't have the information that he seeks, which is this actually. Did I? Oh, you kill me? Yes, Dahlia. Yeah, so he shows her this, and he says, do you recognize this? Do you know what this is? And this is something we see, again, throughout the series, this image, which we learn eventually is related to something called Jaldai, or Jalday, or Judy. And, of course, we see this figure is seen in various moments on a what is shown to be a sort of an ancient Indian map, which is in a form that you generally don't see Native American maps of that nature. But anyway, this mysterious symbol, and of course, she has no idea what it is. And of course, that was her card. She was dealt a card, and unfortunately, it was not in the cards that she would survive. And so poor Dahlia meets her end. And of course, again, as you said, Sandy, just very much like Shigur, it's just coldly presented with a challenge, and of course the challenge has failed, and then very coldly and efficiently executed.
Yeah, see, now you can see it. Like that's like, okay, yeah, we're definitely in that register. And that's just interesting to me for a lot of reasons. They probably aren't worth going into.
Yep, and then of course, before we dip back into the world of supernatural, we meet another character who's called Chantal, and played by Jennifer Jason Leigh. I don't know, but I remember, Sandy, that you were amused by the redneck archetype.
Like this is one of these things that I did not like the way he did it in Wild at Heart very much. I'm very sensitive to the way Southern characters are presented, especially whenever they're not, especially whenever the director is not one of us or whatever. David Lynch actually nails it in such a way that I'm absolutely willing to if you're gonna make fun of Southerners, if you're gonna make fun of us, this is how you do it. Like you have to, but if you're gonna do it, you have to. I'm not even gonna tell you what the formula is, but you have to cover all four pillars. And I'm not gonna tell you what the pillars are, but all four of the criteria are met here.
My favorite detail, of course, you can see it on the chair, is that she constantly, through almost every scene she's in, is eating Cheetos.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Some nasty gas station snack food. Like it's so
and
it's beautiful.
They're all over the floor as well, as you see. Oh dear, oh dear. So and of course I didn't include a slide, but there's a wonderful moment where he samples the moistness of her private parts and finds them sufficiently moist, which is sort of hilarious, given the fact that this character has a husband who you meet later on.
Yeah.
Who seems very happy with the whole arrangement. And these, I would say, these two, Chantal and her husband, are Mr. C's most loyal foot soldiers. They are absolutely aligned with do everything that he requires of them. So seem to be the only characters who are safe, at least safe from Mr. C. Maybe not safe from everyone, including Polish insurance agents. So as we mentioned before, then we're back with Dale, and yes, and of course, a very haunted-looking Leland Palmer. And I know that, in fact, the reason that Leland, well, I mean, obviously there are story reasons, but the reason Ray Wise, of course, because Lynch and Ray Wise was absolutely, I mean, he loves talking about Twin Peaks, and he was very pleased to be a part of it, and so he said, please, David, put me in, coach. So Lynch actually just sort of wrote this scene so that Ray Wise could appear in The Return, which is nice. So Cooper sees sees Leland Palmer, and of course Leland says, save her, and and there is, of course, he's got his mission. Now, of course, he just had a whole scene with someone who said she was Laura Palmer, whom he completely ignored through the whole scene, and then left. So odd, very odd that, of course, on the heels of all that, then we get this exaltation to actually proceed on your chivalric quest. And he finally parts the curtains. And of course, what does he see? He doesn't see Glastonbury Grove. He sees this desert highway. And of course, there's a rental Lincoln racing down the highway. And who should it be? It's Mr. C. Let's just say that that whatever he triggered, whatever the good Dale triggered, he encounters that head on a stick arm figure again, who goes ballistic. I mean, literally, it's like screeching and screaming, and then there's a wonderful one of my favorite little lines. Says non-existent, and the striped floor breaks apart, and of course the good Dale exits the lodge, except through the floor, not through the curtains, which again, for me, the Black Lodge is it's like an eternal backstage. I mean, to me, it's also very much like a kind of theater. I mean, a television set, or the wings of theater. You're always, in a sense, behind the curtains, and again, instead of exiting stage left, he exits through the trap in the floor, which takes him, where does it take him?
Into an even stranger place. What the hell?
Well, in fact, he falls and bonk headfirst into this weird structure hanging high above the streets of New York, and then, of course, floats through a portal that we've seen before. Yeah, so it's the experiment. It's the black box, which we discussed so much in the first episode. Yeah. And of course, I made my reference to Francis Bacon here. This is sort of the image that really reminds me of the... should I throw it up quickly just so people can see it again? I'll just do that very quickly. We're coming to the end of the episode. But I want to make sure we get to finish this episode too. There we go. Yeah, so the suit and the bewilderment in the glass box. Yeah, I mean, this is a Francis Bacon painting from 1948. So.
I like the curse that's given, and it's screamed like a curse, almost like an anathema that you would hear at some service, where it's all of a sudden like non-existence is the worst possible fate here. you know, and it's just non-existent. You know, it's just everything there, and then we're all of a sudden dropped down into a void and things that we don't really know either. And I mean, I'm giving away what happens later, but I mean, and also this is another gentleman that we'll see later on who had proposed, but like, you know, Major Briggs is somewhere in this void, which is particularly interesting, and it's another hit on the database and everything that these secretaries are going to play a role in later on. But it just illustrates that, okay, like, it's another part of this world that we have no clue about, because like we know that Major Briggs was a part of something. You can talk about, you know, perhaps like remote viewing or other parts of extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional travel, or men who stare at goats kind of deal. Things that have been sort of in like popular parapolitical spaces for years, as long as this stuff had been declassified or publicly available as information. And then, you know, Dale is just kind of like almost just as a bewildered simpleton is now also exposed to the same degree of unknowingness, non-existence, and being. And other people are there as well, noticingly, however, without eyes, which I think is very important if we're going to build off perhaps a little bit of our, we're not Gnosticism, but we can't help but mention it. If you don't have eyes, then how are you to perceive wisdom? Yet you kind of just exist in this space. It's particularly, it's non-existence, yet at the same time, it's a greater level of control over what else is out there.
Indeed, and curiously, as someone says here, notice the kid wasn't watching the glass box. Well, again, we don't know. I mean, we don't know if this occurs before or after the brutal slaying of Tracy and what's his name? Again, the setup is here, of course, but there's no one minding the store. So curious, yeah. Who knows actually the sequence of events here? But here is, of course, the good Dale thrust back into the world, or so we think. And then we see this place. Oh, this place is always filled with good memories, isn't it? Yeah, the familiar Palmer house. Well, what's been going on? Well, I mean, we learned what the log lady's been up to, sort of. We learned what other characters have been up to. Well, what has Sarah Palmer been up to all these 25 years? Living the good life, I suppose. Yeah. So we see how
I just have to interject here because people love my New Orleans slice of life shit. So this actress is Grace Zabrowski, and her family actually owns a very popular. Her family owned at the time. They've probably sold it since then. They owned a number of gay bars in New Orleans, and she is from New Orleans. Okay, that's where Grace Zabrowski's from. And when she's playing this character, it's fascinating that she's like fallen into an incredibly Southern archetype. And when you speak about elements of the Gothic, Prude spoke a little bit about what I would call elements of the Gothic earlier when he was referencing the uncanniness in American forest. It's a very New England Gothic conceit. This is instead a very Southern Gothic conceit. It's sort of interesting to find that Lynch uses the West as a sort of mixing ground to blend both of America's native Gothic traditions. But there is an aspect here where Grace Zabrowski does this thing where she just drops the act entirely. And like there were some moments when her accent comes out, she sounds like an old Southern lady. And like this is the crash failure pattern for old Southern ladies. This is what their life looks like. There's no shortage of these people in real life, you know.
Very true.
Yeah. I also I always thought that, I mean, just the nature of Grace Zabrowski's performance, I always thought she was sort of the most menacing in a way, even in the original series. There's something really off-putting about her.
Oh, she will be now.
And she certainly is now. She's also, of course, if people know Wild at Heart, she plays an absolutely mortifying character in Wild at Heart. She's the sort of the woman with the brace on her legs, with a monobrow, who has sex with a black man with Harry Dean Stanton's blood splattered all over them. Yeah, quite a horrible scene. My favorite bit about our first encounter with Sarah Palmer, though, is of course we see what she's watching on television through those mirrors. And famously, of course, in the original series, one of the most, well, talk about serendipity, but David Lynch was filming Zabriskie lying on this sofa in the original series, and she's sleeping or she's passed out, and she startles awake and she stands up, and the camera has to do this, this sort of pan up with her. They actually practiced it, to get the camera movement right, because it had to track just with her and follow her face as she sat bolt upright. And unbeknownst to Lynch, because again, continuity people weren't paying attention, but the set dresser, whose name was Frank Silver, was visible in the mirror behind the sofa. And so when she sits bolt upright from the dream, you never see what the dream actually is. You see Frank Silver's face reflected in the bottom of the mirror. And who is Frank Silver? Of course, he is the actor. He is the man who went on to play Bob. When they actually filmed this scene, there was no Bob yet. And so it was the fact that then the cameraman said, "Oh, no, David, we got to do it again, because I could see Frank in the mirror." And David said, "That's the greatest thing I've ever seen." Oh, yeah. So, of course, again, one of these wonderful moments of serendipity where just because of that face, and you can see it if you go watch the original series. It's in season 1, one of the early episodes where you see this, and it's quite spooky because there's his little face. There's his little face. Oh yeah, I forgot. Bast Klutwig. Yeah, Zabriskie is also a very memorable character in Inland Empire. Brutal fucking murder. No? All right. And again, we see in the mirrors what she's watching. And of course, what she's watching is an old film of lions tearing apart an animal. Because what better amongst the pills and cigarettes and Bloody Marys? And notably, she's always drinking Bloody Marys, of course. Not by chance, I don't think. But yeah, she's watching retro violence on TV, which is sort of what we're doing. I always thought there's a subtle dig again at the viewer, because of course this idea that Sarah Palmer exists in this eternal hell of sitting on the sofa watching horrible violence on television. I think that's certainly a commentary on David
fitting way to
Lynch's
cope.
Commentary, and was quite in line with David Lynch. He had very poor opinion of television, particularly back when Twin Peaks was first on the air. My God, scary as hell, right? She's so scary.
See, again, I like. There's so many things. I'm actually glad Prude's here to bring the human element in, because I, as someone who's thoroughly crazy, encounter people like this in my day-to-day life. And so I'm just like, oh yeah, it's totally normal to see an old lady whose face opens up a pit to an alternate dimension. That happens to me daily. So I like to have that be shocking to people. It's nice to it's nice to be reminded there's normies there.
Prude, do you see ladies like this in your day-to-day life? I don't.
I used to more often when I worked in law. Not so much. Not so much nowadays.
Yeah.
No, I really just deal with one lady enough, and thankfully she doesn't pull her face off and reveal something totally terrifying. I mean, I could admit there's a marriage commentary in there somewhere, I'm sure, but no, I don't.
Yeah.
I like I said earlier though, with the Laura Palmer thing, I just thought it's particularly interesting that in this part she is she's the inverse of Laura Palmer, wherein she's out there doing she's the darkness, whereas her daughter's the light.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, the devouring mother. She's Clytemnestra. And then, of course, the episode ends with the first of our comforting visits to the Roadhouse. And here we see some of this recurring cast of strange millennial characters. But sitting with them, another old friendly face. Of course, it's I can't remember, David Lynch. If you ever watched any of the sort of behind the scenes things of there's a documentary on YouTube which is Kyle MacLachlan and Machen Amick, who's the actress who plays Shelley, and they're talking, and Lynch he often called people by nicknames. So he famously called Laura Dern Tidbit. He called Machen Amick. He called her. He mispronounced her name and then just deliberately mispronounced it for all the time he knew her. And he called Kyle MacLachlan, he called him Kale, because Dino De Laurentiis, who was the producer of Blue Velvet, who was Italian, could never say Kyle. He always said Kale. And so Dale, and so David Lynch called him Kale. Anyway, so we get to see Shelley again. It's good to see Shelley looking fine, looking well preserved.
She's the only one of the Twin Peaks ladies that I have to say aged into. She's more attractive than she was in the original.
Oh, well, I don't know if I go that
There's
far,
a take,
but she looks okay. I thought Peggy.
I like absolutely chopped Shelley. It's great. I love everything about
Peggy.
her.
Peggy Lipton looked good too.
But she reminds me of a poem I wrote called "Rot Flower, Rot Flower." If you,
we can get into that. Follow Christopher Sandbatch on Twitter for more poems. But she's out with the ladies, hanging out at the Roadhouse, and of course, what are they looking at? Well, they're looking at everybody's least favorite character. Well, actually, not everyone's, just mine, James.
Right, yeah,
Hurley.
you can't stand him. It's funny, like watching the series with Dee. Every time James Hurley comes on screen, this is through like what. 40 hours of television. Every time it gets a groan. Every time.
I don't know why I've always hated James Hurley, but there we go. But of course the ladies don't, particularly Shelley. Yeah, James was in a motorcycle accident. Just like Bob Dylan, everything changed after the
motorcycle. He was in a motorcycle
accident
called Season 2.
Damn.
Holy shit.
Oh, nasty.
That's savage.
That whole arc, I have nothing nice to say.
No. No. In fact, I tell people, if you're people who've never seen the original series, I said you can skip that. You can skip don't watch it. There's literally no reason to watch that entire plot arc, which takes up, I mean, if you add it,
what, together, 5 episodes?
Yeah, it's an hour. It's at least an hour of the show throughout 5 episodes or 6 episodes, and it's just completely worthless. It's the stupidest thing ever. But of course, this was after Lynch left the show. Yeah, James was in a minute, and as Paul W. Hall notes, James, he's always been cool. Ugh. I don't know, Shelley. I don't know.
You got to get your callbacks right at the end before people like me and Sandy enjoy the next 20 minutes of credits with the music.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course Serum Fighter brings up the most pernicious earworm from Twin Peaks, which is just you and I. You know that
song is terrible. That song is terrible.
I hate it.
And I don't know what, because I've been listening to David Lynch's music. He's more, the thing that's most interesting, I can't stand to watch David Lynch movies without headphones in, because he's the same kind of sound nerd I am. Again, David Lynch's spirit entered my body. But he's the same kind of sound nerd that I am. And like every this is one thing, every scene has a sonic texture. Like it never lets up, and like the music is some of my favorite. I like David Lynch's taste in music. I like David Lynch's music, but that song is awful.
Yeah,
what the hell?
I do wonder if it was intentionally written to be a
kind
of
Dawson's Creek bad. It is.
Yeah,
that's
kind
exactly
of
what it is.
Dawson's Creek bad, eh? Ooh. And unfortunately, we do get a full performance of it in a later episode of Return, sadly. And then we, of course, see some more familiar characters, including, weirdly enough, this is one thing that I don't understand. So the guy in the background is, of course, Jacques Renault, who people should remember as the piggy, evil bartender in the original series, right? But Jacques Renault was murdered by Leland Palmer, possessed by the spirit of Bob. And I just always wondered, well, what's he doing back in the Roadhouse? What's he doing there? I don't know. I think actually this is another case where the actor, who unfortunately has passed, was not doing very well, and various people said, David, you should find a way to shoehorn him in so that he gets scale and residuals because he needs help. So that's my theory, is the only reason he's here. But it's never really explained. You actually see him in another scene as well at the bar. But I always thought it was strange because it's clearly Jacques Renault, but of course Jacques Renault's dead.
Is he credited as Jacques Renault?
That's a very good question. I will have to look.
Or just bartender?
He may be. Let's see. Or is he credited at all? I'll have to check the actual episode. I don't have the full credits. So House Patron, Woodsman, Dean Hurley is Philip Jeffrey. Yeah, no,
but the bar becomes the Roadhouse becomes, as it has in the first episode, the place where the audience gets to catch up and the encounters happen. And for us, it's just, I don't want to just call it blatant fan service because it's more than that, but it certainly feels like it the first time we go there.
Someone says that's his brother. I mean, we know he had a brother called Jean Renault, who was a character in season 2.
Well, then, let him just be the brother.
He could be another brother, the other brother Daryl that we don't know. Yeah. It's a different Renault. They spawn in Quebec like tadpoles and find their way to the Roadhouse later in their life cycle. Very good. I like it. The other character, of course, we see in this in this shot is his name is. Oh, you're right. He is credited. His name is Walter Olkowitz, and he's Jean-Michel Renault. So yeah, it's another brother. You're right about that. So good. I missed it. And of course we see we see Balthazar Getty playing his character Red. Yeah. And who appears in later scenes. We get to see him again. You may also recognize Balthazar Getty as being Pete from David Lynch's Lost Highway. So looking good. And yes, he is one of those Gettys. He's a recipient of a huge portion of the Getty fortune. So acting is just a bit of fun. And we end with miserable James Hurley.
Still pining over the same woman.
After all these years. It's amazing.
Shoot, I've gone through 3 women in the time that we've been doing this.
Yeah, you've gone through 3 women in the time we've done this episode, probably.
No.
Sorry. Anyway, so any final words, gentlemen? Unfortunately, we've sort of reached the end, and we. But interestingly, is basically it does seem to pan out to 2 hours per episode. That's okay.
I've just accepted that I'm in this for the long haul.
Oh, same. Someone asked me when I said I was doing this. He said, "Are you going to cover every episode?" And I said, "I think that's the plan."
Yeah,
I'm hoping some of them. I'm hoping some of them could be combined into. We could do 2 at a time.
Yeah, no, I think we can with some of them. A lot of important things happened during this episode. So,
it's one of those things where it's like I said, it almost like any like fantasy series, they bother me to talk about because they get so damn complicated so quickly. There's so much happening that it's difficult to like. You can't. There's a lot of stuff you can't not mention. It just the story expands horizontally at an incredible pace.
And a wonderful final from a commenter. He says lyrics from the song, which is by a band called the Chromatics, playing during the scene, sums up the plot of The Return. At night, I'm driving in your car, pretending that we'll leave this town. We're watching all the streetlights fade, and now you're just a stranger's dream. Took your picture from the frame. Wow!
You know how bad it is. Like
didn't even pay attention. That's amazing.
I've seen the Chromatics twice.
Oh,
I am not surprised in the slightest.
Yeah, I don't know the Chromatics at all. In fact,
but I say this as a guy who's seen the Decemberists live more than
I've seen the Chromatics in Austin, and I've seen them in New Orleans.
I was going to bring up the Decemberists, Prude. I remember your shameful admission.
It's not a shameful admission. I know they're like ultra shit libs, but they make Colin Malloy's a great musician.
Yeah, they're incredible.
Well, okay, then I have to cop to a Gen X thing where I once
go get Send Me a Gaga for a stream.
Well, no, I once I'm much cooler than him, but I once went to see Belle and Sebastian. So if you want, you want a shameful admission.
No, those acts are great.
Oh, yeah. Well, anyway, we don't, and so actually after this episode, we begin to see the bands. Like Lynch actually films the performance, so which is very interesting thing we will talk about in upcoming streams. Not sure when the next installment will be. Whenever my friends are available, may not be this next week, but it will be soon, and we shall diligently plod on. Gentlemen, I just have to say thank you very much. Of course, always enjoy the conversation, and you make this stream into something interesting, which it certainly wouldn't be if I was here. Just
I'll be around. I'd say I'll be around next week. The only thing I had this other thing that I got to go do. We've
all got things to do.
I've been so busy lately, and I hate to just drag this out. It's like all of my projects are ending, so I need new ones.
Yeah, I know the feeling. But yeah, as we do all have to rush off, I thank you everyone who's come to watch the stream. And of course, I forgot to do it at the beginning, but I will just say, if you would like to contribute to, I can't play the music because I got a copyright claim. I didn't get a strike, but I got a claim by playing the little jingle, which I know to be out of copyright, but someone claimed it anyway, so I got rid of it. So I can't play the little jingle. But if you'd like to buy me a coffee, you can visit buymeacoffee.com/John Dee, spelled with an IOHNDEE. And this is in lieu of super chats. I'm not monetized on YouTube, so if you'd like to chip in, if you like the stream or whatever, and do, of course, hit the little thumbs up, hit that bell, like and subscribe. I feel like a real YouTuber now. Anyway, thanks everybody. Thanks, boys. And we shall see you next time.